Thank you, Anirban, for organizing this well-attended meet. And I'm so glad that you actually got Shurujit and Joydeep to speak, because it's very important that we actually get people who've worked on the ground to narrate their experiences of what is happening. Now, we can multiply the examples, what Joydeep has mentioned, what Shurujit alluded to. For example, I just noticed today itself that there is a new talent search scholarship which has been initiated in Bengal, whereby for the general Janta, it's 70% marks as a cutoff, but for Muslim students, it's 50%. Now, these are sort of lack of even-handedness which can be multiplied. And the larger question is that these examples are not totally unknown. The instances of Gundagardi, which we pointed out, which happened 2-3 days ago, I think everybody, at least in the districts and in Kolkata, will tell you their own experiences of what has happened. The larger question which is pointed out, which is worth considering, is why is there such a great deal of passivity which marks these sort of outrages? That these distortions which have taken place in West Bengal, why are they marked with such a lot of passivity, indifference almost? Now, I think that really, to my mind, is at the core of this question. And to address that, of course, we can never be definitive about trying to give any explanations. I will try to suggest certain possibilities in which we can view what is the collective mentalities which exist in Bengal, which may explain some of these things. I think I'll start by saying two observations of Bengal, which may appear facetious, but I think really sums up a state of being in Bengal. The first is, which I've often heard people say, Bengal is a lovely place to get out of. And the second one is, they say, the bongs always do better outside Bengal than they do in Bengal. And I think both, in a sense, capture what is happening. They've caricaturized the whole thing. But I think that feeling that somehow we are living in amidst a quicksand is very much there. It's sometimes very sad when you go to Calcutta and you meet lots of middle class people, or sort of my age, people who are sort of almost finished their working life, and that tinge of sadness which occupies them when they realize that their children are not going to be there. They moved away somewhere else. Either they moved away to Manhattan or some place like that, or they moved out to Mumbai, Delhi, somewhere else, or Bangalore. There are housing estates. I mean, the average age in Kolkata is much higher than the rest of the country, any comparable city. The reason for it is very simple, that Calcutta has become a wonderful retirement home, that the productive forces have ceased. And that's a monumental tragedy. The human tragedy that brings about is something which is worth realizing. Now, at the heart of this, and both Shurujit and Joydeep alluded to this, I would say, is this idea of exceptionalism. This is a term which has often defined Bengal, that we are different. Throughout the Gopal Krishna Gokhale might have said what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. Actually, the reality is what India thinks today, Bengal doesn't think similarly. And I think that's been made into a complete virtue in various ways. Surajit referred to the superabundance of poets, scraggy-looking people. Now it's an interesting observation. Those of you who saw Bengali films, particularly in the black and white days, these days it's a bit vulgar, the films are not that great anymore, may have been struck by one thing, that almost all the films were overwhelmed with a sense of sadness. Happiness didn't enter the equation of most of them. Apart from a few, in the 60s, you had those Uttam Kumar films, which is good romance and, very nice. But apart from that, post that, it was all sad. If you've seen one of Mrinal Sen's films called Ekdin Pratidin, I don't know if you've seen it. It just infuriated me from scene one to the end. Someone was sad, sadder, saddest. You see, now sadness coupled with esoteric, the love of subtitles, the profound love of subtitles. And on top of that, you add a sense of victimhood. Now that victimhood, to some extent, historically is understandable, because it is true that partition of India, which is often forgotten particularly in Delhi, took place in two parts of India. One in the west and one in the east. The eastern part somehow is forgotten. I met a person who, from Hong Kong, one Asian British chap who wrote a book on the bloodshed of partition, etc. He was very moved by it. His family had suffered, etc. So he wrote this. Not a very good book, but all the same. But they said, "Oh, you mean to say there was similar things which happened in the East?" No. The point is, and I go back to Shyama Prasad Mukherjee in this context, it's very, very interesting. Because on the question of partition in the East, there was always a sense of denial. For a very naive reasons, the central leadership of the Congress believed that actually this is a temporary aberration. It's not really going to work. Maybe they had a lot of prescience, because ultimately it got reversed in 1971. But not in the way they imagined. So, the huge exodus of population, the social dislocation which took place, was never really addressed. Whereas in Delhi you had refugee populations who prospered and thrived with their entrepreneurship, etc. In Bengal you had camp after camp after camp which thrived on victimhood. And these subsequently became the breeding grounds of Naxalism. So that sense of victimhood has always been there, and the left front capitalized on it. Throughout the 70s, there was one recurrent slogan, Center Taka Dichche na. The center is discriminating against us. Volumes were written on it. How Bengal was discriminated, how the freight equalization killed the steel industry, and how at every stage Bengal was. Some of these arguments were actually justified. They had a certain basis to it. But I'm not going into the merits or demerits of it. I'm going to say how it affected the popular psychology, particularly the psychology of the political elite. And that is the feeling that somehow we've been shortchanged by the rest. That there exists this evil people in Delhi, they are always out to shortchange Bengal. Whether in cricket, so starting from the discrimination against Subhash Chandra Bose, right to, Saurav Ganguly should have been made permanent captain, it exists. So that's a point which successive Bengali politicians, whether it's Jyoti Basu, whether it is Mamata Banerjee, they have, in ways explicit or subtle, they have used it quite successfully and built on that. That's the first one. The second point, which also flows from there, and I think for this, people like Rabindranath Tagore share a lot of blame, which I call povertarianism. To be poor is to be noble. That ultimately, if you are slightly down in the dumps, that's where the absolute nobility of your soul can come out. Translate that into economic policy. Translate that into the philosophy of governance. Therefore, shoddiness is good. Simple living, high thinking. Not simple, but actually pathetic living, but high thinking. Hence, the romanticism which went with the smoking of Charminar, the suffering of tuberculosis, that was part and parcel of the communist culture, which was... so this povertarianism was very much a thing. So there will always be and the resistance to the nano factory in Singur was part of that. You see, here was a classic example of the communists who had nurtured this spirit quite aggressively and then did a U-turn and said, no, industry is good. Having killed off industry in Bengal right from the 60s actually caused a rapid deindustrialization of Bengal. They suddenly woke up to its virtues. And Buddhadev Bhattacharya was right. Bengal needed that industry. But that mentality which it permeated, he could not fight that. And he tried to fight it with its usual communist methods of strong arm tactics. It rebounded, and Mamata Banerjee reaped the benefits of that. How long this povertarianism is going to continue, we don't know. Hopefully, it'll erode at some point. But let us remember that this is a factor which very much exists in terms of understanding the Bengal polity. The final one which I want to talk about is what I call progressivism. Surojit alluded to it again in his thing about the schism, for example, which took place in Hindu society for the time of the Brahmo Samaj. Now, what is also not known is that there was also a very fierce conservative resistance. That conservative resistance is probably under-researched in various ways because normally it's the victors who tell the story. For instance, on the case of Saraswati Puja, it would interest people to know that the first major assertion of the right to host Saraswati Puja happened in 1928. And the architect of that was Subhash Chandra Bose. And he wasn't protesting against Nobi Puja. He was actually protesting against the governing body of a Brahmo college. So these are certain awkward facets of Bengal, which naturally, if they're very uncomfortable, if they're loose strands, you can control. Progressivism has defined this thing because that seemed to be, that again, it fits in this sense of enlightenment. Rabindranath Tagore, his things on nationalism, for example. Some very various progressive writers here, they quote it in various ways. They always flaunt Tagore. See that and see the lumpens who are going around in other parts, shouting Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Now, Tagore's lofty view of how to transcend nationalism was a direct attack on Mahatma Gandhi, for which he was lampooned and attacked severely at that time. The context is important. But if you take away the context, then you establish an absolute. And that absolute, it comes out, is that Bengalis by and large are wedded to this idea of progressivism. And therefore, from Brahmo Samaj to Rabindranath Tagore to the Communist Party, becomes a seamless movement. A seamless movement of enlightenment, of lofty thought, etc. And that progressivism is very much, and one of the features of that progressivism is a denial of what might loosely be called sectarian conflict. The fact that there is a developing schism in Bengal society is not sufficiently appreciated or internalized, partly because people say, no, it can't happen here. It's a sort of it can't happen here sort of syndrome. How can this happen? Everyone is living in peace. Bengal, great, you have your biryani, everyone has their thing. So everything is very hunky-dory. That's why you can change the name of Durga Puja from Durgotsav to Sharadutsav seamlessly. Of course, it's a secular festival. Durga Puja is a secular festival. That, to my mind, is really what it's all about. Now they have had a lot of significant vocabulary changes in the Bengal the textbooks. Ramdhenu, which is rainbow, becomes Ramdhenu. Subtle one. You can sort of sleight of hand, you can pass it through. But it's not a sleight of hand. The point is, you want to disavow a particular heritage which has been part of your life. At one time, the real criticism of the Bengal, it's worth looking at, that the criticism which, for instance, Jawaharlal Nehru used to make about the Bengal Congress of pre-47 days was that the Bengal Congress, to him, was indistinguishable from the Hindu Mahasabha. He used to make that accusation. Now, in today's history, you won't find that, because it's been re-evaluated in a different sort of way. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that everything about being of that Bengal Congress of pre-47 was right. But the point is, there was a Hindu consciousness in Bengal. A very strong Hindu consciousness in Bengal, which was a direct result of the type of politics which the Muslim League was engaging in. For instance, in the early 1940s, for instance, there was a fierce controversy about what the symbol of Calcutta University, which used to be a lotus at one time. And it was changed. Because lotus, need I elaborate more, is associated with certain things. And at that time, the entire luminary, the entire intelligentsia of Bengal, from Sharat Chandra Chatterjee. Sharat Chandra Chatterjee was an interesting man. He thought Gandhi was he called Gandhi a Gujarati Baniya. He had a certain aesthetic revulsion of Gandhi, which Subhash Chandra Bose also had. Their objection to Gandhi was aesthetic. And that sort of tendency was also somehow got merged into this whole business of progressivism, etc. And the final outcome of it, and it's a complete khichdi which has happened. I mean, if you want to say, well, this strand, that strand, but it's a question of what you ultimately pick up from history which continues into the present. And I think that's really the issue. And this profound sense of denial, which we see in Bengal today, and it is disturbing, because what it actually means is that one day it will explode without any sense of direction. And you'll have some sort of a bloody riot or something like that, where people will know why, will suddenly realize what the hell has happened. Because the real causes of these simmering tensions are not being addressed. They are being looked at through the very cynical view that 30% votes assured, 10% you'll get in any case, that's good enough to win elections for life. And with that cynicism, meanwhile, the rest of Bengal will buy the proverbial one-way ticket out and go everywhere else. And that's really what the waste of Bengal is. That an entire state is today being condemned to permanent marginalization because it's a victim of its own warped imagination in lots of ways. And I think that's the issue, that's the point which has to be broken which the political class in Bengal, and there are a lot of intellectuals and thinkers and all that which still exist in Bengal. It's only when they come and actually address this question frontally. Now, whether this process can be encouraged through people shaping the discourse from the outside, or it will generate from itself, I think it's really got to be a twin process at work. But for various reasons, people inside seem a little petrified and afraid of breaking the consensus, afraid of being contrarians, which is why it's always nice to go with reflect the echo chamber and say, we are fine, we are progressives, we see films in subtitles, and that's good enough for us. Thank you very much.